Wilt Chamberlain was excellent at many things, and among those was the fact that he was incredibly efficient from the field. A good example of that was his 1966 to 1967 season, where he was named the league MVP as he shot 68.3% from the field. During one stretch in particular, Wilt was especially hot as he made 35 straight shots without a miss over a 4-game stretch. Included in that stretch was a game against the Baltimore Bullets, where he had one of the greatest triple-doubles ever with 40 points, 30 rebounds, and 10 assists as he shot 18 of 18 from the field. To this very day, 18 shots without a miss is still the NBA record. This is the all-time list of the most MVP awards in NBA history. Sitting at the very top is the captain and the NBA's all-time leading scorer, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, followed by the one and only Michael Jordan and the game's ultimate winner, Bill Russell. The thing is, there has been plenty of MVP caliber seasons throughout the game's history, but quite often, those MVP-worthy seasons were narrowly beaten by someone that the voters simply thought had a better season. So what if the list went by the most top 3 MVP finishes of all time? How would the greatest players stack up then? Well, in that case, now LeBron James is at the top of the entire list with a total of 11 top 3 finishes. Michael Jordan keeps his spot at second, Kareem drops down to third, and guys like Kobe Bryant, Oscar Robertson, and Jerry West now join the list. There have been many high flyers and great dunkers throughout the years, but the first player to dunk a basketball in an organized game is probably someone that you've never heard of. Joe Fortenberry was an explosive 6'8" player who achieved the first official dunk at Madison Square Garden in 1936. Apparently, Joe was so athletically gifted that he was able to dunk a basketball up until the age of 55. He had a major influence on the league in more ways than one, as he's also the player who's accredited for the inspiration of basketball's goaltending rule, as Joe was known for camping under the basket and easily swatting away balls as they approached. Dennis Rodman is a 2-time Defensive Player of the Year winner and is widely considered as one of the greatest defensive players to ever play. Some would even go as far as saying that he's the very best, although there is certainly plenty of competition for that title. Rodman's defensive reputation is proof that you can't measure a player's defensive greatness with stats alone, because in the entirety of his 14-year career, Rodman never averaged at least 1 steal or 1 block over the course of a season. Not only can no other Defensive Player of the Year winner make that claim, but of the 39 Defensive Player of the Year seasons of league history, Rodman's 2 are the only times a player has won the award without averaging at least 1 block or 1 steal. In the summer of 2006, the NBA decided to change something that they hadn't altered for 35 years, the NBA basketball. The game ball had been traditionally made with a leather exterior, but this time, to start the 2006-07 season, NBA players would be using a microfiber basketball. The league office claimed that this synthetic basketball was the best basketball in the world, but after utilizing it for just a brief period of time, the NBA players had a much different opinion. For example, Shaq said that the ball felt like a toy, he expected percentages to go down league-wide, and the person who came up with the idea should be fired. Other players like Dirk Nowitzki, Steve Nash, Carmelo Anthony, and LeBron James all had complaints as well, and said that the ball was tearing up their fingertips. Apparently, some players even played in practice with band-aids on their fingers. The only superstar who seemed to like the basketball was actually Kobe Bryant, who said the new ball provided a solid grip. He was pretty much alone on this one though. After physicists confirmed that the players were correct in their issues with the ball, that it caused abrasions and it was actually less bouncy, the NBA scrapped the new ball after a 2-month span in the NBA and went back to the traditional leather ball. This whole thing was a big dramatic ordeal for the league that I remember quite well, so it may get its own video at some point. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar is the NBA's all-time leading scorer and he has the most MVP awards of all time. But he actually should be the all-time leader of one other important list as well. Hakeem Olajuwon has the most block shots in NBA history with a total of 3,830. Next is Dikembe Mutombo, and sitting at third place is Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. The thing is, block shots did not become an official stat until the 1973-74 season, and at that point, Kareem had already completed 4 seasons in the NBA, 2 of which were MVP seasons. If we simply played it conservatively and took the average amount of blocks that Kareem got each season they were tracked, then the average comes out to 199 per season. Add that to the first 4 seasons of Kareem's career, and now he's the all-time leader in blocked shots as well. Of course, Bill Russell and Wilt Chamberlain would have something to say about this as well if blocked shots had been counted at all during their careers. This is a list of the highest number of assists in an NBA Finals game. Some of the greatest performances from team first players when the games mattered most. Any guesses on who the players are who made this list? Scratch that, who the player is who made this list, because the first spot is Magic Johnson, and the second, and the third, and the fourth, and the fifth. It's no wonder why so many people consider him as the GOAT point guard. Many people, including yours truly, recognize Bill Laimbeer as the dirtiest player that the NBA has seen. I mean, his nicknames are the Prince of Darkness and his Heinous, which sums him up pretty well. In Larry Bird's own words, Rick Mahorn would hit you playing defense, but Bill Laimbeer would try to hurt you. We know that the game has changed from its physical and punishing days in the 1980s, but no fact may better prove that point than this one. Despite Bill Laimbeer's punishing reputation and consistently dirty behavior, he had a streak where he played in 685 straight games without missing a single contest. That's the 5th longest streak of NBA history. Regardless of the fact that he was constantly getting into fights and punishing opposing players in the paint, he was almost never suspended. Finally, he served a 1-game suspension after getting into this fight with Brad Daugherty, where he actually punches the All-Star center in the face. Apparently, that's what it took to get the league office's attention in the 1980s. The early 1950s was a much different time in the NBA. For one, the shot clock did not exist yet, which means that teams could take more unconventional approaches to try to win basketball games. The night is November 22, 1950. The Minneapolis Lakers were the dominant team of the league, led by their superstar George Mikan. They were also incredibly dominant on their home court, as they were carrying a 29-game home winning streak into this evening. The Fort Wayne Pistons were determined to end the streak by any means necessary, so when the game started, the Pistons played a game of keep away whenever they had possession of the ball. This not only disrupted the Lakers' offense, but it also resulted in the lowest scoring game in NBA history, where the Pistons snapped the Lakers' streak in a final score of 19-18. George Mikan tried to carry his Lakers as he scored 15 of the Lakers' 19 points, including all 4 of the team's field goals. Unfortunately, it wasn't enough, and just a few years later, the 24-second shot clock was introduced to the NBA, and low-scoring affairs like this officially became a thing of the past. The Lakers and Celtics are the 2 most iconic and illustrious basketball franchises of all time. They also share the league's longest rivalry, which goes back into the days of the league's infancy. The NBA turned 75 years old this season, and despite the league's long life at this point, the Lakers and Celtics are still neck and neck in their rivalry in more ways than one. The 2 franchises are tied at 17 NBA titles apiece, which is a shared record for the most of all time. What's even crazier is how the Celtics have the most wins in NBA history with a total of 3,462, which is only 35 games ahead of second place, which of course is the Los Angeles Lakers. Their lifelong winning percentage is separated by only 0.5%. Literally, a season or 2 can be the difference in who holds the number 1 spot for the most wins in NBA history. I know I'll be watching it closely over the next couple years. Throughout the history of basketball, many men have been drafted to be NBA players, but they weren't all men. Technically, 2 women have been drafted to the NBA, and those women were Denise Long and Lucia Harris. Both were obviously incredibly talented basketball players who each dominated their competition to a tremendous extent. Denise was the first to be selected, as she was taken in the 13th round with the 157th pick by the San Francisco Warriors. The thing is, she was just exiting her senior year of high school, where she averaged 62.8 points, including one game where she dropped 111 points. At the time, no players were allowed to enter the NBA straight out of high school, and the commissioner at the time, Walter Kennedy, saw the move as a publicity stunt, so he blocked the draft selection. Lucia Harris may have not been the first woman to be selected, but since Long's pick was voided, Harris in technicality became the first woman to ever be officially drafted by an NBA team. After a dominant tenure at Delta State, she was selected in the 7th round of the 1997 NBA draft by the New Orleans Jazz. She had a genuine opportunity to try out for the Jazz and play in the NBA, but when given the opportunity, she declined. Turns out, she was pregnant at the time of tryouts, so she decided to waive the opportunity and take the time to raise her child instead. For her achievements, she would later go on to make the Basketball Hall of Fame. Scottie Pippen is objectively more successful than Michael Jordan on Christmas Day. Scottie is a guy who has an argument for the title of the ultimate Christmas performer, as he has a perfect 7-0 record on December 25th, which none of his superstar peers can match. Over those 7 victories, Pippen put up all-around dominant numbers of 22.9 points, 8.9 rebounds, 5.7 assists, 3.4 steals, and 1.6 blocks, on 47.2% shooting. Compare that to MJ's numbers over the holiday, and you'll see that there's at least one calendar day out of the year where Pippen can claim that he was the greatest player on those Chicago Bulls teams. In other words, you can say that Pippen was basically a man amongst boys. Tracy McGrady didn't play many Christmas Day games, but when he did, he was arguably the greatest Christmas Day performer of all time, as he averaged 43.3 points, 7.7 rebounds, 4.3 assists, and 2 steals on 48.8% shooting. His 43.3 points is the highest scoring average in NBA Christmas history, and he won 2 out of those 3 games. Included in those games was one of the all-time great solo performances where he torched a young LeBron James with this near-monstrous triple-double. Christmas Day is one of the biggest days for the NBA, as many superstars and teams have made their mark throughout the years on this holiday. But with that being said, not everyone has been a part of the fun. Only 2 teams in NBA history have never ever played on Christmas Day, and that is the Charlotte Hornets and the Memphis Grizzlies. The funny thing is, I would actually really enjoy a Christmas Day game next season between the Hornets and Grizzlies, as a battle between young stars like Ja Morant and LaMelo Ball would make some pretty exciting television. Some organizations are certainly more familiar than others with December 25th. New York is the best example of that. The Knicks have played more games on Christmas than any other team in NBA history, as they've competed in a total of 53 contests. But unfortunately, just like most of their recent history, they haven't been very successful, as they have a lifetime win percentage of only 41.5%. Speaking of Christmas Day being rough on the Knicks, the largest margin of victory on December 25th came in 1960, when the Syracuse Nationals defeated the New York Knicks. It wasn't just a blowout, but a Christmas Day massacre, as the final score was 162-100. Not only is 62 points the largest margin of victory, but 162 points are the most points ever scored by a team on the holiday. It was certainly a well-rounded effort from the Nationals, as 9 out of their 10 players finished with double-digit scoring. With a couple of the previous facts, I talked about some of the strongest Christmas Day performers. But not every superstar does very well on the holiday, and a great example of that is the Warriors legend Steph Curry. Steph isn't just bad on Christmas Day, but for some reason, he's simply hot garbage. Over his 8 games, he's won 3 and he's lost 5, as he put up averages of 13.1 points, 6.8 assists, and 5 rebounds on only 30.2% shooting. He's also making an awful 20.4% of his 3-pointers attempted. This player is the all-time leader in points scored on Christmas Day, with a total of 395, which is trailed by another player with a total of 383. Any guesses on who these 2 players are? They're 2 of the greatest legends to represent the purple and gold, which are Kobe Bryant and LeBron James. Of all the teams throughout the history of the league, the Los Angeles Lakers have the most wins on Christmas Day. But a lot of that success comes from the sheer volume of the games played on the holiday, and they're actually nowhere close to the greatest team win percentage. That honor belongs to the Miami Heat, who have a lifetime win percentage of an incredibly dominant 84.6%. Traditionally, the NBA ratings spike on Christmas Day, as some of the best regular season matchups take place on this holiday. With that being said, one classic game stands above the rest as the most watched Christmas game of all time. It was the Lakers and the Heat in 2004, which was a highly anticipated matchup between Kobe Bryant and Shaquille O'Neal, which was the first time they played on the same court as adversaries. The game had a 7.3 rating and roughly a total of 13.2 million viewers tuned in. The game certainly didn't disappoint and was thrilling throughout. Kobe had the chance to win the game in the final moments, but missed the long jumper as time expired. He finished with 42 points and 6 assists on 40% shooting, but Shaq got the last laugh with his 24 points and 11 rebounds in a 104-102 victory. Christmas is a time of giving, and two players did that better on the holiday than anyone else. The first was the 6-foot guard Guy Rodgers in 1966, who was finding all of his Bulls teammates on this night, as he finished with a total of 18 assists. Only one other player has ever matched that total, and it was the underappreciated Nate "Tiny" Archibald in 1972, who amassed a total of 18 assists as well. At the time, this certainly wasn't the biggest surprise coming from Archibald, as he achieved history that season by leading the entire league in both points and assists that same year. As I mentioned earlier, Kobe Bryant is currently the all-time leading scorer on the holiday, but if you assumed that meant that the Mamba was generally very successful on the holiday, you would be gravely mistaken, as the Mamba only has a 6-10 record on December 25th. The Minnesota Timberwolves are the worst franchise in NBA history in terms of winning percentage, and even they have a greater win percentage than Kobe does on Christmas Day. With that being said, you would probably be going a step too far if you said that he was as bad as Steph Curry was on the holiday, as the Mamba maintained at least respectable numbers on the holiday, which is much more than Steph can claim. This player has the most victories on Christmas Day with an impressive 10-3 record. Over those 13 games, he put up solid numbers of 24.2 points, 6.2 assists, 5.3 rebounds, and 1.8 steals on 45.7% shooting. Any guesses on who this player is? It's the legendary shooting guard and the 3-time NBA champion, Dwayne Wade. This next fact isn't very surprising, but it's an impressive fact nonetheless. Of all players in NBA history, Wilt Chamberlain is in second place for the most points ever scored on the holiday when he reached a total of 59. He's also easily the Christmas record holder for the most rebounds in a single game when he reached a total of 36. Amazingly, he did both of these achievements in the same game, which was against the New York Knicks in 1961. If I had a nickel for every time the Knicks were on the wrong side of history, I may just have enough to purchase the team. Let me start on this next fact by making two obvious statements. One, LeBron James is really great at the game of basketball, and two, he's played professionally for a very long time. Due to these facts, LeBron has played a lot of playoff games throughout his career. In fact, he's played more playoff games than any other player ever has. With that being said, that still doesn't quite sum up just how impressive his total of 266 playoff games is. So instead, consider this. Over his postseason career, LeBron has played a total of more playoff games than 50% of NBA teams. Considering how most of these franchises have existed way longer than LeBron has, this fact is utterly stunning to say the least. You may have heard a lot of older basketball fans refer to their generation as the days when men ruled the game. Well, there's actually a small bit of truth to this. In the modern NBA, the average age of the players is 26.3 years old, which is actually among the youngest seasons of the game's history. But back in the late 90s, the average age got as high as 27.9 years old in 1999, which makes a lot of sense considering how the pace of play was much slower during that era, which is better suited for veteran players. Most of the contending teams during that era was much older than the rest of the league as well. Kobe Bryant and Dwayne Wade are two of the greatest shooting guards to ever live, and during the prime of their careers, they had many battles and basically stood in a class of their own as the two best guards in the entire NBA. Both of these legends are known primarily for their ability to score the basketball, but one of them was specifically a much more explosive scorer than the other, and no stat may better prove that point than this one. Over the course of Dwayne Wade's 17 years in the NBA, he achieved a total of 3 50-point games. Kobe got 4 50-point games in just 1 week. As I'm writing the script for this video, Joel Embiid currently sits atop of the NBA's MVP power rankings, and if he actually wins the award, then it won't only be history for himself personally, but it will also be a historic moment for the 76ers franchise, as the award would give the 76ers the most MVP winning players in NBA history with a total of 5, which would surpass the totals of the Los Angeles Lakers and the Boston Celtics. Those 5 players would be Wilt Chamberlain, Julius Erving, Moses Malone, Allen Iverson, and Joel Embiid. That's a pretty terrifying starting 5 now that I think about it. Speaking of Embiid, the man owns one of the more surprising stats that I've ever seen. Obviously, we know who the all-time leading scorers are and who have the highest scoring averages in NBA history. But there's another scoring stat that's rarely considered: points per minute. With a minimum of 250 games played, the scoring legends at the 3rd and 2nd spot come as no surprise: George the Iceman Gervin and, of course, Michael Jordan. But standing above them, and everyone else for that matter, is the 76ers All-Star. I'm starting to think that we might actually be taking this guy for granted. There's an entire group of legends who you could label as volume shooters, and then there's Joe Fulks, who was in his very own class of shot chucking. Fulks has the record for the most missed shots in a single game when he missed a whopping 42 shots in 1948 against the Steamrollers. Not only does he own the 2nd spot, but he actually owns 4 out of the top 6 spots for the most shots ever missed in a single game. The game of basketball was obviously very different back in the 40s when he played, but in the 47-48 season, he averaged 22.1 points on 25.9% from the field. He actually averaged 7 more shots per game than he averaged points, and people called Iverson a volume shooter. Only 9 players in NBA history have ever achieved the 50-40-90 season, which is when a player averages at least 50% from the field, 40% from three-point range, and 90% from the free throw line over the course of a season. This player is easily the shortest player to ever achieve such a feat. Any guesses on who this player is? It's the 4-time All-Star and legend of Cleveland, Mark Price. Speaking of Cleveland, LeBron has demonstrated his elite conditioning and his incredible longevity for almost 2 decades now. If you combine LeBron's career regular season minutes with his postseason minutes, then you'll see that he has played for an astonishing 62,449 minutes. If you can't quite wrap your mind around that figure, then consider this. Before LeBron James showed up in Cleveland, 3 of the greatest Cavaliers to ever play were Mark Price, Brad Daugherty, and Austin Carr, and all 3 of those players' careers combined was a total of 64,959 minutes. LeBron averages roughly 3,400 minutes per season, which means that he'll be passing the grand total of these 3 Cavs combined around the middle of next season. That is what you call one-of-a-kind longevity. In a past facts video, I mentioned how Steph Curry can miss his next 800 straight three-pointers and would still have a greater three-point shooting percentage than James Harden. Although that is incredible, this similar stat is probably even more stunning. For some time before Steph Curry arrived, Ray Allen was widely considered as the greatest shooter of NBA history. But Steph Curry can miss his next 500 straight three-pointers in a row, and he would still have a greater three-point shooting percentage than the lethal Ray Allen. If that stat doesn't firmly establish Steph as the GOAT shooter, then I don't know what would. Life has been rough on the Sacramento Kings for about the last 20 years, but as bad as you think it is, it's probably even worse than that. Case in point, the Seattle Supersonics are seen as ancient basketball history and haven't even existed for the last decade and a half. And yet, even they have a more recent playoff series win than the Sacramento Kings. If I asked you guys who was the worst free throw shooter of all time, I bet that many of you would say Shaquille O'Neal, as the Diesel was famous for his low arcing shots and for his awful struggles from the charity stripe. But the thing is, you would be wrong in that case. Very wrong. The worst free throw shooter in NBA history is the Hall of Famer Ben Wallace, and it's not even close. Just how bad of a free throw shooter was Ben Wallace? Well, let me put it this way. Shaq could have taken an extra 3,000 free throw shots during his career, which is roughly 5 seasons worth of free throws for Shaq, and even if he missed every single one of them, he would still have a greater career free throw percentage than Ben Wallace. So yeah, he's that bad. You may have not known this, but for the last half century, the Western Conference has been dominated by two states specifically, California and Texas. Although some franchises have got close, the last Western Conference team to win the NBA championship that didn't come from either Texas or California was the Seattle Supersonics in 1979, where the extremely underrated Dennis Johnson secured the Finals MVP. Kevin Durant is seen as one of the greatest distance sharpshooters of all time, as the guy is well within range as far as 30 feet away from the basket. On the other hand, his former teammate Draymond Green has been very inconsistent from three-point range throughout his career, and has an overall below-average three-point efficiency. Not to mention how his shooting form kinda makes him look like he's wearing an invisible backpack. With that being said, Kevin Durant has never made more three-pointers in a single game than Draymond Green has. In fact, up until a couple weeks ago, Draymond was above Durant with a greater three-point performance, which was when he made 8 three-point field goals against the Portland Trail Blazers in 2016. It took Durant 14 seasons to finally match that total, which he did on April 2nd, 2022 against the Atlanta Hawks. Interestingly enough, both players lost each of their games. Michael Jordan famously set the NBA Finals record for the most three-pointers made in a game when he hit a total of 6 against the Blazers in 1992, which was followed up with his iconic shrug. Obviously, with the inflation of the three-point shot, the record has been broken numerous times since then. But what many of you may have not known is that this performance isn't even the Bulls franchise record for the most three-pointers made in an NBA Finals game. That was actually eclipsed just several years later by his longtime teammate Scottie Pippen. This performance from Scottie is massively overlooked, probably because it was Scottie instead of Michael, but also because it was one of the Bulls' 2 losing efforts in those finals, which certainly limits its ability to be positively remembered. Regardless, it's worth recognizing one of the few records that Scottie has over Michael. Speaking of Michael Jordan and the NBA Finals, MJ is often praised for his undefeated 6-0 record in the NBA Finals. But believe it or not, that's actually not the greatest undefeated Finals record in NBA history. That feat is actually held by a pair of Celtics legends, and no, neither of them are Bill Russell. The greatest undefeated Finals record is held by Tom Sanders and John Havlicek with a perfect 8-0 record. In the case of Sanders, he was a quality role-playing forward who was in the right place at the right time, while Havlicek was a legitimate superstar who was truly one of the more underappreciated legends of basketball lore. And honestly, he probably would have taken a couple Finals MVPs from Bill Russell if they had existed throughout his career. Bruce Bowen was a solid role player for the San Antonio Spurs dynasty, and was most famously known for his elite perimeter defense. But along with that, he had some other unique and, dare I say, perplexing qualities. For example, his 02-03 season, where he played all 82 games and where his Spurs eventually went on to win the NBA championship. During that regular season, Bowen was the most efficient three-point shooter in the entire league, hitting a remarkable 44.1% from three-point distance. Yet somehow, simultaneously, he was also the worst free throw shooter in the entire league, shooting a pathetic 40.4% from the charity stripe. That's right, Bowen was the best in the game from 20 plus feet out, yet was the worst from 15 feet away while being unguarded. Go figure. When it comes to the greatest facilitators of all time, there was arguably no one better than Magic Johnson and John Stockton, who stand at the number 1 and number 2 spot for the most 20-plus assist games in NBA history. The rest of the top 10 list is all-time great point guards like Rajon Rondo, Isaiah Thomas, Russell Westbrook, Steve Nash, Kevin Johnson, Deron Williams, Chris Paul, and the all-time record holder for assists in a single game, Scott Skiles. But here's what's crazy. Magic Johnson and John Stockton combined have more 20 assist games than the rest of the top 10 list all put together. And if we're looking at only playoff games, Magic Johnson by himself has as many 20 assist games as the total of all other players of NBA history combined. That, among many other reasons, is why most people consider Magic as the greatest point guard of all time. Since the beginning of the NBA, there have been a total of 78 individual performances of at least 60 points. With that being said, one team has allowed more of these historic evenings than any other franchise, and I really can't say that I'm surprised by this fact. The New York Knicks have allowed an opposing player to score at least 60 points a total of 10 times, and famously, one of them was 100 points. The teams tied for second are the Hawks and the Lakers, allowing a total of 8 each. In the middle of 2007, Kobe Bryant was very unhappy with the Lakers organization. He had just played the last few seasons with starting support like Smush Parker, Luke Walton, and Chris Mim. It was enough to make just about any superstar go crazy, and it resulted in the Mamba demanding a trade to another team. There was a lot of negotiations during that time, but easily the most notable one was when the Lakers offered Kobe to Cleveland in exchange for LeBron James. The Cavaliers quickly said no to that offer, but then said that they would give a package containing anyone else on the team in exchange for Kobe. The Lakers then said no to that counter offer. Whether it was Kobe Bryant and LeBron James switching teams, or Kobe and LeBron lining up as teammates in Cleveland, it's pretty crazy to think about the impact this could have had on basketball history. Although, before you dream too much about a super team pairing of LeBron and Kobe in Cleveland, Kobe did later state in an interview that he would have used his no-trade clause to veto a move to Cleveland. Apparently, even the proposal of having LeBron James as a teammate in place of Luke Walton wasn't enough to appeal the Mamba to live in Cleveland. Michael Jordan and the Bulls dominated the 90s, we all know this. But overall, Michael Jordan has an equal or winning record against every other MVP player of the 1990s, with the exception of one, Hakeem the Dream Olajuwon. In Jordan's total of 23 games against Olajuwon, Michael Jordan's team won 10 times, and Olajuwon's team won 13 times. This is an interesting fact that only adds to the what-if debate. If Jordan never retired to play baseball and instead the Rockets and Bulls met in the 1994 NBA Finals. Let me know in the comments section which team you think would have won in that hypothetical matchup. PER stands for Player Efficiency Rating. It's an advanced stat that's intended to factor in just about every value on the court in order to give a player a grade of his overall value. Some people like this stat, while others think it underemphasizes or overemphasizes certain aspects. With that being said, most players on the NBA's recent 75 Greatest Players list had a very high player efficiency rating. Of inactive NBA players, a man named Neil Johnston has the highest career PER of anyone who didn't make the 75 Greatest list. Not only that, but among all players, Johnston has the 11th highest player efficiency rating of all time, at 24.7 over the course of his career. That's an even higher career rating than guys like Larry Bird, Magic Johnson, Kobe Bryant, Kareem, and Tim Duncan. He's a 6'8" center who won the NBA championship in 1956. He was also a 6-time All-Star, a 3-time scoring champion, the 1955 rebounding champion, and he led the league in field goal percentage 3 times. With a resume like this, it's quite surprising that he didn't make it into the top 75. Many players have won the league MVP throughout the years, but one man was so impactful all around the court that he was able to win the award while averaging only 13.8 points per game, securing the title as the lowest scoring MVP of all time. Any guesses on who this MVP was? It's the NBA champion and the all-time great rebounder Wes Unseld, who won the award in 1969. On this channel, I've talked about many basketball legends who were ahead of their time, but one sharpshooter fits that description better than any other. His name is Louis Dampier. He was a 6-foot point guard who played in the ABA and NBA from 1967 to 1979. Before the three-point line was introduced to the NBA in 1979, it existed in the 60s for the ABA, and Louis took full advantage. He wasn't just an accurate shooter, but a volume one as well, as he was consistently pulling up from three-point distance in transition decades before modern guards popularized it. Specifically, in the 68-69 season, he shot 7.1 three-point attempts per game. It took several decades for another player to average that many attempts in a season. In fact, the average NBA team wasn't averaging as many three-point attempts as Louis did by himself for the first 12 seasons of the NBA having the three-point line. Plus, he's also the ABA's all-time leading scorer, so that's pretty cool too. He's definitely an underappreciated gem of basketball lore. It's not very often that I say anything critical about Wilt's 1962 season. That was the year that he averaged 50 points and 25 rebounds while putting up his historic performances like his 100-point game. With that being said, if there was a man who had an answer for Wilt Chamberlain that season, it was his rival, Bill Russell. Wilt's lowest scoring game that year came against Bill and the Celtics, and his second lowest game, and his third, and his fourth. In all four of those games, Wilt shot well below his average efficiency, and his team lost by an average of 25.2 points per game. This is one of the numerous reasons why many people still call Bill Russell the greatest defender to ever live. There have been many dominant performances throughout the years on the game's biggest stage, and they've come from a variety of positions. But there's an interesting trend that's been happening in recent years. Since 2012, every single winner of the Finals MVP award has been a player at the small forward position. It's a large bundle of years to simply be sheer coincidence, but it is certainly possible. Let me know in the comments section if you think this is simply coincidence or if there is a reason for it. The basketball has evolved quite a bit over the years. When the game of basketball was invented in 1891, the game was played with an old-fashioned soccer ball. In 1894, the first Spalding basketball was created, which had laces similar to that of an American football. In 1937, the NBL introduced a new ball with the laces removed for the sake of better dribbling. In the 1950s, the color of the ball was changed to orange, that way the brown ball no longer blended in with the brown court. In 1967, the ABA put their own spin on the ball and introduced a red, white, and blue color scheme. In 1984, the NBA finally introduced the ball we know today, the Larry O'Brien official game ball. In 2006, the NBA tried a synthetic microfiber basketball, but after a couple months of performance issues and players complaining about damaged fingertips, the league decided to scrap the ball and return to classic leather. There are three major American sports leagues where the playoff matchups are a best-of-7 series. In the history of the NHL, 4 teams have come back from a 3-0 deficit to win the series. And in the history of Major League Baseball, just 1 team has come back from a 3-0 deficit to win the series. The NBA is the only major North American sport where a team has never come back from a 3-0 deficit to win a series. But 3 teams did come very, very close. The first instance was in the 1951 NBA Finals, where the New York Knicks charged back to tie the series at 3 games before the Rochester Royals finally closed it out in the 7th game, with a final score of 79-75. The second instance was in the second round of the 1994 playoffs when the Utah Jazz narrowly defeated the Denver Nuggets in the 7th game with a final score of 91-81. The craziest part is how the Nuggets almost made history for the second straight playoff series, as they had just defeated the first-seeded Seattle Supersonics as an 8th seed, which was the first time an 8th seed had ever defeated a first seed in the playoffs. The fact that they nearly followed that up with the first 3-0 comeback in league history is certainly a little-known fact. The third instance was the first round of the 2003 playoffs, where the Blazers stormed back to tie the series at 3 games apiece before Dirk Nowitzki and the Mavericks closed it out in a 7th game. A total of 23 players have won the NBA's Defensive Player of the Year, but only 2 of those players have won that award and yet never received a single All-Star selection. Can you guess either of those players? They are Michael Cooper in 1987 and Marcus Camby in 2007. Throughout the years, many NBA legends have delivered incredible performances on Christmas Day, but the greatest performance of them all may have been from one of the more underrated legends of league history. On December 25, 1984, Bernard King dropped a whopping 60 points, 7 rebounds, and 4 assists on 72.4 true shooting percentage. It's still the most points ever scored by a player on a Christmas Day game. Despite his historically dominant and efficient performance, his Knicks still lost the game to the New Jersey Nets 120-114. Speaking of high-scoring losses, Wilt Chamberlain holds the record for the most points ever scored in a losing effort when he scored 78 points and added 43 rebounds in 1961. The victor was the Lakers with a score of 151 to 147, and they were led by Elgin Baylor, who put up 63 points and 31 rebounds of his own. For a large portion of NBA history, offensive fouls were not considered as personal fouls, which means a player could be hit with a charging foul and it wouldn't contribute towards his 6 personal fouls for disqualification. I was literally searching for hours trying to figure out when this rule changed, but I couldn't find a definitive answer. So let me know in the comments if you know the answer. I do know that this rule was in place as late as the 1963 NBA Finals, since I was just watching that series a couple days ago. It begs the question, can you imagine an even more violent version of a prime Shaquille O'Neal if that rule had never been changed? It's certainly an interesting aspect to consider. After the Shaquille O'Neal trade in 2004, Kobe Bryant and Caron Butler were teammates in Los Angeles for the 04-05 season. Butler was not only a quality player, but Kobe actually said that Butler became one of his best friends throughout his career. The two teammates were doing intense workouts together when Kobe discovered that Butler was drinking Mountain Dew to quench his thirst. Kobe was very disappointed and told him that he needed to stop drinking it. According to Butler, he tried, but this wasn't something he simply drank occasionally, but it was a very real addiction, an addiction that he began hiding from Kobe. When players were resting and drinking Gatorade on the bench, Butler would quietly tell staff members to sneak into the locker room and secretly put Mountain Dew into his Gatorade cup. He was apparently never caught by Kobe drinking Mountain Dew during games. One can only imagine the kind of attitude that would have triggered from the Mamba. Wilt Chamberlain is probably the greatest rebounder in NBA history, which certainly isn't a hot take considering the fact that he has 11 rebounding titles, snagged a record 55 rebounds against Bill Russell, and averaged as high as 27.2 rebounds per game over the course of a season. If those stats don't communicate the dominance of his rebounding abilities, then consider this. Over the course of his career, Wilt Chamberlain accumulated more rebounds than Dwayne Wade and Larry Bird have accumulated points. Only 12 players in NBA history have scored at least 50 points in consecutive basketball games, and these are 11 of the 12 players on this list. Any guesses on who the 12th player is? It's the somewhat underrated and the underappreciated scoring forward Antawn Jamison. It's one thing to score back-to-back 50-point games, but it's another thing entirely to do it in the playoffs when the games mattered most. Only one player has scored back-to-back 50-point games in the playoffs. Any guesses on who that one player is? Think underrated with this one. Like almost no one ever talks about this guy. That's right, you guessed it, it's Michael Jordan. Tim Duncan is one of the greatest defensive players of all time, and is arguably the greatest defender in modern history to never win the Defensive Player of the Year award. To put his dominant and consistent defense in perspective, consider this. Dikembe Mutombo and David Robinson are two of the greatest rim protectors that the game has ever seen, and the two of these defensive anchors have combined for a total of 14 All-Defense Team selections. Tim Duncan, by himself, has more All-Defense Team selections than both of these greats combined. Because of this defensive longevity, Duncan was the second youngest player to ever earn an All-Defense Team selection, which he did at the age of 21. And he was also the oldest player to ever earn an All-Defense Team selection, which he did at the age of 38. Larry Bird has one of the greatest performances of all time that people don't talk about quite enough. Officially, only 4 players in NBA history have ever achieved the incredible quadruple-double, and Larry Legend was very close to joining this elite few. It was on February 18, 1985 against the Utah Jazz in Utah. According to Larry himself, this may have been the greatest game of his career, as he poured in 30 points, 12 rebounds, 10 assists, 9 steals, and 2 blocks on 59.1% shooting. Here's the craziest part about this night though. The Celtics were destroying the Jazz in just about every aspect, and at the end of the third quarter, they were leading by 22 points. Due to this, Bird didn't even play in the fourth quarter. That's right, he almost put up an insane quadruple-double in only 3 quarters. Casey Jones was the Celtics head coach, and when he realized early in the fourth quarter that Larry was only one steal shy of the historic quadruple-double, he asked him if he would like to go back into the game. But Bird refused and said, "I already did enough damage." There have been many record-setting scoring performances throughout the years, like Wilt Chamberlain's 100 points in 1962, Kobe Bryant's 81 points in 2006, and Michael Jordan's 63 in Boston Garden in 1986. But every single one of these remarkable scoring displays was achieved by an NBA All-Star. The highest scoring performance by a player who never made a single All-Star team came from a man that many of you have probably never heard of. His name is Purvis Short, and he had one of the best perimeter jump shots in the entire league, which was extremely memorable for its high-arcing trajectory. The record-setting night came on November 17, 1984, when he dropped a whopping 59 points. It was also one of the most efficient scoring explosions of all time, as he was 20 of 28 from the field, 4 of 6 from three-point range, and 15 of 16 from the free throw line. That adds up to a true shooting percentage of 84.2%, which only a couple of players have ever eclipsed while scoring over 50 points. Imagine having this kind of performance, then average 28 points per game over the course of the season, and you're still not selected to the NBA All-Star team. Despite the amazing scoring machine that guys like Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant, and James Harden were, they never once scored at least 60 points in back-to-back NBA games. In fact, no one has, with the exception of one incredible player, Wilton Norman Chamberlain. Not only did Wilt have back-to-back 60-point games, but in 1962, he actually did it in 4 straight, with the 4th game being his legendary 100-point performance. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to keep the streak alive in the 5th game when he finished with just 58 points. With this next fact, I'm actually not done talking about that stretch of 60-point games from Wilt Chamberlain. In the first game of that 60-point streak, Wilt dropped 67 points and 21 rebounds on 65.8% shooting. As unbelievable as this performance was from Wilt, it probably wasn't the most significant thing that happened in that game from a historical standpoint, because on the other side of the court was the Hall of Fame shooting guard Richie Guerin, who was right in the middle of the prime of his career. On this night, Richie was doing just about everything right, as he dropped 50 points, 13 assists, and 11 rebounds on 60.7% shooting. Only 6 players in NBA history have ever achieved a 50-point triple-double, and this one from Richie Guerin was only the second to ever take place. He achieved the 50-point triple-double even before Wilt Chamberlain had, and the Knicks also won the game 149-135. Richie enjoyed the high while he could, because Wilt definitely got his revenge just a few nights later. Remember Kobe's legendary Achilles game, where he played every minute he could, fought through several injuries, and balled his brains out as he put up a stat line of 34 points, 5 rebounds, and 4 assists as he walked off the court after hitting his iconic free throws? Well, some of you might not know that despite all of that, Kobe wasn't the best performer that night, as this new kid was having one of the best nights of his career. Steph dropped 47 points, 9 assists, 6 rebounds, and 3 steals on 54.8% shooting. He was also 9 of 15 from three-point range. It would take something like a torn Achilles from Kobe to make such an impressive game from Steph become overlooked as time has gone on. Not only that, but Steph nearly sealed the game with the most amazing game-winning three-point shot that the league has ever seen. It's interesting that as the decline of one legend starts, the ascension of another begins, and this theme was later repeated between these two when Kobe retired with his 60-point farewell game on the same night that Steph eclipsed 400 three-pointers and completed the 73-9 record season. When the voters decide the MVP winner, they typically vote for multiple players and rank those players on their own list. So the winner doesn't necessarily have to have the most first place votes, but just the highest total of points in order to win the award. With that being said, only one player in NBA history has won the league MVP while not finishing with the most first place votes. Any guesses on who that MVP was? It was the all-time great point guard, Magic Johnson, in the 89-90 season. The person who finished with more first place votes was Charles Barkley, by a pretty substantial margin. The Minnesota Timberwolves are the worst team in NBA history. No, seriously, objectively, they are the worst. Of all the teams in NBA history, they're the only franchise to have a lifetime win-loss ratio lower than 41%, as they currently sit at 39.4%. To put in perspective just how bad that franchise is relatively, consider this. The San Antonio Spurs are coming off of great success in the previous 2 decades, so they're probably due for some kind of slump. Well, the San Antonio Spurs could go 0-82 for the next 24 seasons straight, and they would still have a greater win-to-loss percentage than the Minnesota Timberwolves. All you Minnesota fans, you have my sympathy. Please don't unsubscribe. When it comes to making smart decisions and protecting the basketball, the NBA has been steadily improving throughout the years. This has been a natural progression throughout the decades, but this fact is especially true in recent history, as we've been witnessing the cleanest form of basketball that the league has ever seen. Of all seasons of NBA history, the last 6 seasons hold all of the top 6 spots for the best turnover percentage. Turnover percentage is a stat that averages the amount of turnovers per 100 possessions. My question to you guys is, why do you think this is the case? Have players just grown smarter throughout the years? Or does it maybe have something to do with a lack of physical defense? Let me know what you think in the comments below. There's stat padding, and then there's what Ricky Davis tried to do in 2003. At this point in his career, Ricky Davis was a 23-year-old 6'6" shooting guard. He was a decent scorer, averaging about 20 points per game, albeit on a terrible Cavaliers team that finished the season with a terrible 17-65 record. On this night in Cleveland, the Cavs would get a rare win over Utah, which was putting an end to their 7-game losing streak. With less than 10 seconds to go in a blowout game, all Ricky had to do was catch the inbound pass and dribble out the clock. The thing is, at this moment, Ricky had a stat line of 28 points, 12 assists, and 9 rebounds, making him only 1 board short of a triple-double, and Ricky was well aware of this fact. So he decides to take matters into his own hands, misses a shot on his opponent's basket on purpose in an attempt to get a free rebound. Well, the statisticians weren't buying it, so he finished the game 1 rebound short of a triple-double regardless of his desperate move. Blowouts have been happening for as long as the NBA has been in existence, but with that being said, not all blowouts are created equal. Case in point, on December 17, 1991, when the 13-8 Cleveland Cavaliers defeated the 11-12 Miami Heat, with a final score of 148-80. Miami threw in the towel so early that not a single one of their starters played more than 23 minutes. That's literally less than half the game. At one point, the Cavs were ahead by a whopping 73 points, and the second half was the worst of it, as they outscored Miami 75-27 in the final 24 minutes. The craziest part is that you wouldn't think this Miami team would be beaten this badly. Sure, they certainly weren't a great team, but they did make the playoffs this season as an 8th seed, and were led by solid players like Glenn Rice and Steve Smith. But as the saying goes, that's why they play the game. There have been some close Defensive Player of the Year races, but 3 of them specifically were especially nail-biters. The race in 1989 and 1994 were only separated by just 1 single vote. In 1989, Mark Eaton beat out Hakeem Olajuwon, and if just 1 voter felt differently, Hakeem would have won his 3rd Defensive Player of the Year award. In 1994, it was now Hakeem who got the award by just 1 vote over his rival David Robinson, which would have been a 2nd Defensive Player of the Year award for the Admiral. The 3rd close race was a very unique situation. Only 1 player in NBA history has won the Defensive Player of the Year award without getting the most first-place votes. Any guesses on who that player was? It was Kawhi Leonard in the 14-15 season, and the player who had more first-place votes was Draymond Green, which was one of the more hotly debated awards of basketball history. Only 4 players in NBA history have ever officially achieved the illustrious quadruple-double, and one of those players is the legendary Hakeem Olajuwon. He did it on March 29, 1990 in a 26-point victory over the Milwaukee Bucks. He played 40 minutes and dropped 18 points, 16 rebounds, 10 assists, and 11 blocks on 42.9% shooting. Here's the crazy part. In 75 years of the NBA's existence, there have only been 4 official quadruple doubles, but Hakeem nearly had a second one in the same month. Just 26 days before his historic quadruple-double, Hakeem's Rockets defeated the Golden State Warriors by 20 points, and in that contest, he had 29 points, 18 rebounds, 9 assists, and 11 blocks on 52% shooting. This is one of the many reasons why the Dream is widely considered as one of the greatest all-around players of all time. There have been many great rim protectors in postseason history, and then, on a level of his own, there was Dikembe Mutombo in the 1994 playoffs. As a member of the Denver Nuggets, Mutombo was experiencing the prime of his career and was destroying records along the way. In the first round of the playoffs, his 8th-seeded Nuggets were taking on the dominant and highly favored 1st-seeded Supersonics. In a best-of-5 series after falling to a 2-0 deficit, Mutombo helped lead his Nuggets back to win the next 3 games straight, to ultimately defeat the Supersonics and achieve one of the greatest upsets of basketball history. Over the course of that series, Mutombo averaged an insane 6.2 blocks per game, which is the highest average for a playoff series that the league has ever seen. It wasn't just a flash in the pan either. In the very next series against the favored Utah Jazz, Mutombo helped push the Jazz to 7 games as he averaged 5.4 blocks over that hard-fought series. That's the highest average in a 7-game series that the league has ever seen, meaning he broke records in back-to-back playoff rounds. Not only that, but in both of those playoff series, Mutombo averaged more blocks than the entire opposing team combined. To simply say that he was an all-time great defensive anchor would be selling him tremendously short. The 2021-22 Lakers had a disappointing season to say the least, but beyond that, believe it or not, there's actually facts that at least present a case of how this team is the most disappointing team of all time. According to the preseason odds, the Lakers were projected to win 52.5 games over the course of the regular season. At the time I'm writing this script, it is impossible for Los Angeles to finish with more than 33 wins. Regardless of the exact number of wins, they'll have the greatest deficit from the preseason odds that the league has ever seen. As I've mentioned in past videos, I expected this team to be disappointing, but not this disappointing. Speaking of the terrible 2022 Lakers, at the time I'm writing this, they just recently wrapped up an 8-game losing streak. They were dangerously close to setting a new record for the worst losing streak in franchise history. The current record is a pair of 10-game losing streaks. The first came from the 93-94 Lakers, whose best player was arguably Vlade Divac. The other was in the 15-16 season, which was Kobe's farewell year, which was pretty brutal up until the final game of that regular season. The thing that's most stunning about that 2022 Lakers team is that they're easily more talented on paper than the other 2 Lakers squads. When it comes to the Defensive Player of the Year award, there have been many snubs and near misses throughout the years. For example, Tim Duncan and Scottie Pippen are widely recognized as 2 of the greatest defenders to ever live, yet neither of them ever won a single Defensive Player of the Year award. But with that being said, there may have been no one who was closer to winning the award than the Spurs defender Bruce Bowen. In 3 years straight, from 2005 to 2007, Bruce Bowen was the runner-up for the Defensive Player of the Year award. Furthermore, in 5 straight years, from 2004 to 2008, Bowen finished as a top 4 player in the Defensive Player of the Year race. Maybe the craziest fact is that in the entirety of the 2000s, no player other than Ben Wallace got more Defensive Player of the Year votes than Bruce Bowen. Not Kevin Garnett, Tim Duncan, Shaq, Metta World Peace, or Marcus Camby. Bowen got more votes than all of them. I wouldn't be surprised if somewhere in a parallel universe, Scottie Pippen was a Seattle Supersonic. Why do I say this? It's because of the fact that Scottie nearly put on a Seattle jersey not once, but twice. The first instance was on his draft day when he was selected with the 5th overall pick by the Sonics before the Chicago Bulls acquired him in a trade for Olden Polynice. The second instance isn't as widely known, but it came in 1994, when Pippen was in the middle of drama with the Bulls front office. The near deal to the Sonics was a trade for the dynamic Shawn Kemp. Of course, a Michael Jordan and Shawn Kemp tandem is interesting to think about. But also, a pairing of Gary Payton and Scottie Pippen may have given Seattle the greatest perimeter defense in NBA history. Back in the 90s, Grant Hill was truly on his way to becoming an all-time great, before his ankle injuries began to derail his career. He was athletically gifted and had skills that had an impact on numerous aspects of the game. After his first 6 seasons in the NBA, he had accumulated a total of 9,393 points, 3,417 rebounds, and 2,720 assists. In the history of the league, only 3 players have eclipsed those numbers in their first 6 seasons, and they were Oscar Robertson, Larry Bird, and LeBron James. If that doesn't give you an idea of the potential we saw in Hill back in the 90s, then probably nothing will. There have been many high flyers who have amazed audiences on All-Star weekends, but since the creation of the NBA dunk contest, only 2 teammates have won the award in consecutive years. Any guesses on who those 2 players are? It was 2 sensations from the 1980s, Dominique Wilkins in 1985 and Spud Webb in 1986, who played as teammates for the Atlanta Hawks. In most sports, it's very rare for a superstar player to be selected outside of the first round of the draft, but it is especially rare in the NBA. Case in point, only 2 second-round picks have ever gone to win the MVP award, and that was Willis Reed in 1970 and Nikola Jokic in 2021. Assuming the Joker actually wins his second MVP this season, he'll become the first second-round player to win multiple MVP awards. Last year, Giannis, also known as the Greek Freak, had one of the all-time great NBA Finals series, as he dominated on the court in numerous ways. One of those aspects was his elite scoring, as he had 3 separate performances in the NBA Finals where he scored at least 40 points. To give you some perspective on just how rare and impressive that is, consider this. Giannis now has as many 40-point games in the NBA Finals as Larry Bird, Kevin Durant, Steph Curry, and Kobe Bryant do combined. Turning the ball over is a part of the game, and in many instances, it's the greatest facilitators who actually average the most turnovers, because they're the players who take the greatest risks while running the offense. With that being said, there are a few exceptions, and the biggest one is DeMarcus Cousins. He's famous for getting a lot of technical fouls, but that's not the only way he's been known to hurt his team. Among centers, DeMarcus Cousins has the highest career turnovers per game average in NBA history at 3.3. Despite not being the floor general, he still has a higher career turnover per game average than risky passers like Steve Nash and Jason Kidd. If you have watched all the way to the end of this video, thank you so very much. It means more than you know. Thanks for watching as always. Make sure to like and subscribe for more basketball content, and I'll see you guys in the next video.